Okay. In 1975, Laura Mulvey published the essay that coined the term the male gaze, a phrase that in the 50 years following has been applauded, dissected, opposed, and turned into a meaningless TikTok buzzword. Originally, the male gaze referred to the idea that unless a film was created in direct opposition to patriarchal ideas, it would visually and narratively serve to make a cishet audience feel good about themselves. The male characters would be the ones instigating every plot point and theme. They would move through the frame as though they owned it. The plot would be built up around them to make them seem in control and, if not morally good, at least justified in their actions. The female counterparts would support them and look pretty, and that is about it. The idea of the male gaze is useful, especially when you're watching the same movies that Mulvey was when she was developing it. Like, the whole essay is an analysis of Hitchcock's Vertigo, and a very good one at that. But there are a lot of gaps in the theory. For example, it leaves race completely out of the picture. It also presupposes that a heterosexual dichotomy is, if not the main focus, then at least a significant part of every piece of media. What happens when a piece of media, misogynistic or feminist, doesn't have that dynamic? What happens if a show is too episodic for a romance plot, or lacks a female character who fulfills that Judy Barton archetype, or is written for a target audience of women? Well, you get this. Star Trek the original series ran from 1966 to 1969, and despite being one of the most progressive shows of the era on and off screen, was developed almost entirely by cis white men. Men who had grown up seeing themselves in films that fit Mulvey's description of patriarchal cinema to a T. TOS breaks many of the narrative conventions Mulvey outlines in her work, though. Romance between Captain Jim Kirk and any woman is rare. When it happens, it only lasts for a single episode, and often the couple share the traditionally masculine art of meaning-making. The woman of the week is usually Jim's intellectual and symbolic equal, if not his superior. But even then, the focus of the show isn't about Jim's relationship with a woman. It's about his relationship with his crew, his ship, and space. The writers of Star Trek were trying to create a show that followed the conventions of that male-driven, female-supported narrative structure that Mulvey is talking about. A structure where there is always a man for a male audience to project onto and a woman for a male audience to look at. But they made the Enterprise a near-complete homosocial environment. That is to say, with the exception of Uhura and several minor characters and guest stars, the main cast was entirely men. In TOS, audiences had Jim Kirk as the meaning maker, but no woman as the object of visual pleasure. What the show had instead was Spock.
Have I ever mentioned you play a very irritating game of chess, Mr. Spock?
Irritating? Ah, yes. One of your Earth emotions.
Mulvey says in her essay that the male figure cannot bear the burden of sexual objectification, and in a lot of cases this is true, but crucially, Star Trek was a show for women. Housewives were the target demographic, the vast majority of the audience, and the people who cemented the show's place in nerd culture canon. This means that the show's Judy Barton had to be male. Spock fills not only the narrative void created by Jim's lack of a consistent romantic interest, but the visual one too. He's there for those housewives to look at. He's there as an object of both intrigue and support for Jim. He's there to form an emotional bond with Jim that is so strong it satiates any need for a romance arc in the show. And most people would agree he performs those duties with flying colors. Furthermore, because TOS is marketed towards women, Jim and Spock represent the very specific kind of masculinity that is men written by men for women. Men like this are emotionally repressed or reserved, usually because of something inherent about them. In this case, Jim's position as leader and Spock's Vulcan heritage. They're married to their work, and seemingly the only thing that can pull them away from it is another man that they feel a deep sense of friendship or brotherhood toward. They're typically a little more effeminate than the average male character, and a lot of their interactions with women are based on misunderstanding or a lack of experience. And if you're thinking, Jack, you just described a gay-coded man. Yeah, I did. I really don't know what Gene Roddenberry thought was going to happen when he swapped a heterosexual romance arc for some homosocial brotherhood. The male gaze is a narrative pattern first and foremost, one that, when used in the right contexts, can lead to some unforeseen but entirely welcome consequences. When someone tries to create a misogynist narrative, but there's no women to be misogynist to, 9 times out of 10 they will accidentally create some pretty compelling queer subtext.
Has it occurred to you that there's a certain inefficiency in constantly questioning me on things you've already made up your mind about?
It gives me emotional security.
down to .8. All deck, this is good.
And TOS is one of the best examples, but there are plenty of other ones. There's Gatsby, and MASH, and Harry Potter, and Supernatural, and like a solid 2/3 of Stephen Moffat's work. There are even other Star Trek projects that do this exact thing. All this to say, a lot of people look at the slash fiction and fan art and subtextual analysis online and assume that it's coming out of left field, that it's some insidious facet of the gay agenda, or horny people looking for romance where there is none. But that's not true. Sometimes the horny people thing is true. But the vast majority of the time, on-screen relationships like Kirk and Spock are just the byproduct of this weird heterosexual horseshoe theory. It's not unreasonable to assume that two male characters have something going on when one of them is quite literally fulfilling the role of love interest.
Captain, a starship also runs on loyalty to one man, and nothing may replace it or him.
It just annoys me when people see all the beautiful work that nerds and fans and gay people do and assume that it's coming out of nowhere. There is always going to be theoretical and textual evidence to back us up. Fan culture only exists because people paid so much attention and analyzed something so closely that they discovered things the creators hadn't even thought of. Those housewives watched Star Trek so hard that they not only made Spock part of our cultural consciousness, they also invented most of the terms and tropes that fans use to this day. You really think there's no critical thought in that? Sometimes it is just horny people, but most of the time, we're right.